Hello and welcome to Feuertips, episode number 48. I'm Stephen Feuerstein, and I have with me a special guest, Rachel. Rachel, how are you? Oh, it looks like Rachel is on and off, but you might have guessed I'm not actually Stephen. So Rachel, it looks like is having a little bit of internet connectivity problems, or maybe it's just StreamYard, but the good news is I know the topic anyway. But I was hoping I'd have Rachel here. You hear me?
Hey.
So Rachel, I invited you onto today's show that I'm sneaking in. Steven's got a little travel planned today, so it's me. But I invited you today because you invited me to a meeting the other day. Do you remember the meeting? The time that you invited me to attend the meeting?
Indeed. I think it was 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, or it could have been Eastern Pacific Time. I make them up a lot.
Right. Well, I see this kind of thing all the time. You did say EST, and the meeting was, it was probably yesterday. Was supposed to be in the meeting at 10 EST, and of course, I came back as the smart. Am I allowed to say smart ass on this show? Are we? So as the smart ass that I am, and said essentially, EST doesn't exist on this day, and it's because everybody has a tough time with time zones. Time zones are they're just hard. Hello MDO. That said, I wanted to talk a little bit about the data types related to dates in the Oracle database and time zones and why you should not try to deal with time zone on your own. You should let the database deal with them. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and talk a little bit about the data types first. So do you know much of the difference, Rachel, between these data types?
I do somewhat, and I know you're going to correct me, but let's start off with date.
Yeah.
It's going to store the date with just using the server time zone, whenever that occurs according to the server, correct?
Right. Well, yeah. Well, the date is going to be whatever date you give it, but it won't store any time zone at all. It doesn't care about time zones. Dates just are hours, minutes, and seconds. That's it. It's going to store hours, and minutes, and seconds. And so a date doesn't describe a moment in time, right? It can't. Because you don't know what time zone it was unless you make some arbitrary rule that every time you do a date, it's going to be a particular time zone. You don't know what time zone it happened. So a date does not describe a moment in time. So my recommendation on when you would use a date, like when you would actually use a date field in a database, is not to describe a moment in time, but it is to describe things like date of birth, for example. Date of birth, usually it doesn't matter what time zone I'm in or I was in when I was born. That's my date of birth. My date of birth is the 6th of August, 1968, right? Can you think of any other things that operate this way, that you don't care about the actual moment in time? You just care about sort of the date?
Oh, sure. Hire date,
Exactly.
termination date. That could be today for me. We'll see.
Right. Termination date, right. So a lot of these things that don't really describe a moment in time, they describe this sort of nebulous, well, okay, that's the day I was born. On the other hand, sometimes you actually do want the moment that the person was born. When on a birth certificate, for example, it's going to give you the actual hours, minutes, and seconds, right? In which case, you might think that timestamp would do that, but timestamp also doesn't have a time zone. It gives you, do you know the difference between date and timestamp?
Well, between the two, the timestamp it has those three options, and it also doesst store the time zone in it.
Right.
Oh, go ahead.
I almost never, timestamp is, I suppose if you want to do date of birth, you could use timestamp as well, right? But I almost never see a need for timestamp.
I use timestamp when I'm setting up for like a DBMS job and I want to use the interval, things like that.
Right. I do use timestamps sometimes if I want to do date math. Like if I care about when something started and when it ended, and I want to get the interval between, I might use timestamp for
Hmm.
that, something like that. Especially if you want more fidelity than just seconds, right? Um, but
Yeah.
but like when I store something in the database, I'm very unlikely to use timestamp. If it's something like date of birth or hire date, I probably would use a date, but a timestamp could give you the same thing. What I really care about though is getting the time zone. So if I wanted to know the specific time that a meeting was at or something like that, then I do need to know the time zone, right? I need to know what time zone the meeting is going to be in. Do you know well, here, I'll just describe the distinction between time zone and time stamp with local time zone. So the first one actually stores something with a time zone. So you could have something like this right here. That would be something that gets stored. So it's storing a time zone, in this case, of -8. Or you could do a time zone like this, that's East US Pacific and so forth. I actually rarely use this either, because I don't actually really care what time zone it was. I care that I know the moment in time. Like, I don't care what time zone a meeting is in. I just care that when I look at it, I know what time zone it is in my time zone. What timestamp with local time zone does is whatever date you give it, it looks at the date and the time zone, and it converts it to the database time zone. Converts to the database time zone.
And
So,
then if you want it back in SQL, you're going to have to pull out that. You're going to have to convert to the other time zone
but
that it originated
you
in.
don't, because it does it for you. That's the great thing about time zone.
Nice.
So if you have something in the database, if you have a column that's timestamped with local time zone, it will convert it into the database's time zone when you store it, and it will convert it into whatever your session time zone is when you pull it back out. So it does the conversion both directions. So you never have to worry about it. You
But
just as long as you set your session time zone to your actual time zone, you can read and write local time zone, timestamp with local time zone all day long, and it will always show it in your time zone.
gotcha. But if I want to see, let's say you entered it, Anton, and you're in the Eastern daytime time
Okay.
zone
Uh-huh.
or another time zone I just made up,
Right.
and I want to pull it out, but I want to see it in your time zone.
All you have to do is change your session time zone to my time zone, and you'll see it in my time zone.
Gotcha.
Or you can cast it to a time zone for that matter. You can actually say, convert this to a particular time zone, and it will cast it to the time zone that you specify. So storing it as a timestamp with local time zone is, in my mind, almost always the way you want to store it, because it will do the conversions both directions for you. And if you ever want to see it in a particular time zone, you can just cast it to that time zone. So if I had stored it this way, timestamp with time zone, it would have stored mine. So it would have stored, for example, 8 a.m. Eastern time, right? And then if you pulled it out, you would have to explicitly convert it to the time zone that you want. But most of the time, the time zone you want will be your session time zone. Almost always. So if you use timestamp with local time zone, you avoid almost all of the conversions. So the only time that it's ever worth it. So what does Oracle EBS Suite use for transactions? Okay, that's a great question. What does EBS do? EBS uses the time zone of your client machine. So whatever the time zone of your machine is, that's the time zone that everything gets converted to. And so EBS is basically used. I don't know if actually EBS uses timestamp with local time zone underneath, but it does all the conversions to at least act like it does. But for almost everything, you want timestamp with local time zone, created dates, meeting times, all of those kinds of things. The only time in my mind that you want timestamp with time zone is if you really care what was the time zone that this was done in. So possibly date of birth, for example. With date of birth, and when you're looking like to put it on a birth certificate or something, you might actually want to store that this person was born at 11 a.m. U.S. Pacific time. right? So I'm going to go one more thing. By default, your database is going to do it's either timestamp 6 or timestamp 9. For all these timestamp things, it will either use timestamp 6 or timestamp 9. Those are how many digits past the second it's storing, like the fractions of a second, right? And 9, most operating systems won't even, you can store 9, but it doesn't mean anything. 6 is about as much as you go. But if you only care about going to the second, if you really just care about going to the second, you should use timestamp with 0. So that is this right here, that is my go-to data type for anything date most of the time, except for these rare occasions with date of birth or higher date, something like that. In those cases, I might actually use timestamp 0. These really are my go-to. This is almost always what I use. Sometimes I use this now instead of this. And the main reason I use timestamp instead of date is because then I can use all the same date math. I don't have to worry about that. So now let's talk the real nitty-gritty of time zones. This is where things get crazy. So I've got this right here. This is sys timestamp TZR TZD. What this is going to do is it's going to convert whatever my current timestamp is to this date format, and it's going to show me the region or time zone that it's saying is right now. And this is another descriptor. I'll talk about that in a second. So right now, my machine that I'm on, the database time zone is set to -4. First of all, I think that's not a great idea. I think the database time zone should generally be set to UTC. But for whatever reason, my database's time zone is -4. So if I'm using timestamps, it's going to do that automatically. The real thing, though, and this is what I don't like, is if you use -4 as your timestamp, it doesn't do anything to get the right time zone after the database, after the time change, like the daylight saving time change. Right now, I'm in daylight saving time. So if I were to look at today's date, and today is October 26th. So if I do this, October 25th, so 10:25, here it's saying -8. If I did this, so it's -4. So if I did this right now, if I do this with -4, it's going to give me -4. And if I just do this and I then move this to 11:1 or 11:25 is after the time change. I shouldn't be in my time zone. I shouldn't be at -4. I should be at -5. What I really want to use instead is this US Eastern. And so if I do US Eastern, now we start getting the right thing here so today, if I do today, which is 10:25, it's going to say EST. But when I jump to 11:25 or 10:25, it's EDT. When I jump to 11:25, it automatically switches to EST.
Right? Unlike me.
Unlike you, right? Right. So the thing when it comes to this that I really encourage people to do or not to do is don't use this offset, right? When you use this offset, you're hard coding, you're ignoring daylight saving time, you're ignoring those kinds of things. If you use the region instead, it will automatically get the right time zone, right? In this case, it's this TZD is giving me the EST. It's showing me that I've said US Eastern, but it knows that US Eastern on that date at that time is EST. But on a different date and time, so if I go back to 11:01, it knows that it is EDT, right? So that makes sense. So looking at this right here, 2022, 11:01, 11 a.m., it's EDT, right? So, and I hate to put you on the spot this way, but what if we do this one right here? This is the same date, 11/1/2015. Oh, I didn't want this. I want the one right above it. U.S. Pacific, U.S. Eastern. So the only difference, oh, I still got the wrong one. I wanted this one. So right here, November 1st, 2015, November 1st, 2022, they're both Eastern.
Okay.
Okay. What do you think the 3 letters will be for this one?
It's just a different year only.
Only
Oh,
the
you're going to trick me, Anton, because it looks like it should be the same. But now you're going to tell me why it isn't, right?
Exactly right. Exactly right. It's EST because 7 years ago, Congress decided to change the date of when we change. We used to change the last Sunday of October. Now we change the first Sunday of November.
Oh,
But
see, I wouldn't have guessed that.
nobody will guess this. That's just that, and that is my point. Nobody's going to get this right, right? If you try to start doing your own date logic, you are going to get it wrong. What about next year? They're right now in Congress. Next year, they've got a law to get rid of standard time altogether and not change it at all. So Oracle and all the folks, they're going to all have to release patches if they change the law, right?
Which in California, we have asked to stay on daylight savings time.
Right.
We asked that back in 2018 and they have yet to grant it to us.
Right.
But this could be the year.
This could, right. In most places, that's probably the case. And then when you start talking, so I've been talking about U.S. Eastern, but it gets way more complicated. In Indiana, different cities in Indiana have different time zones. Some of them recognize it, some of them don't. So I've got examples here with Indiana, where American Indiana has a different time zone than Indianapolis. I mean, you've got these, and then Fort Myer, Indiana, I think has another time zone still. So what I really recommend is that you make use of the time zone region that is provided by the operating system. And all you have to do is, usually the Oracle tools will just do this for you. Now, looks like Rachel's dropped off again, but I'm going to tell folks that use Oracle Apex. If you use Apex, there's automatic time zone encoding. Oh, right. This is Michelle's question. This is where automatic time zone encoding in Apex fails or causes issues. That's exactly right. Because in Apex, it uses this when it should use this, or it should use whatever your browser is saying is your region. So for thanks, Michelle, for the plug. For my plugin. I do have a plugin. If you're using Apex, if you just go to Apex World and look at the plugins, there's a TZ selector plugin. Rachel, I don't know if you caught this, but I was responding to Michelle's. Michelle's got a couple comments here. In Apex has this automatic time zone selector that encoding that uses this, and it's just, in my mind, wrong. Well, we've demonstrated that it can be wrong in these scenarios, right? So there is a plugin that I created for this. So there's a TZ selector. If you're using Apex and you care about all of these things, which you should, don't use the automatic time zone encoding at the application level in Apex. Instead, use the plugin that's on apex.world. Okay, so this all gets super complicated, but the easiest thing to do is, first and foremost, use what the client's machine is presenting as their region for your time zones, and use timestamp with local time zone, probably timestamp 0 with local time zone. That should be your go-to. And if you just do those two things, your life will be so much easier. I have one more little thing to talk about, and that's math with dates. Many of us are used to doing something like this. Select this date +1 from dual, right? To add a day. So if we do this, it adds a day. We're so used to doing this. We do this all the time. And what we do is we say, okay, I'm going to do the same thing with timestamp. I'm going to add 1 to it. And it seems to work. It looks like that just worked, right? But the truth is, you've lost time zone information. What happens when you do this? When you add 1 to a timestamp, this is a timestamp with time zone, but when you add 1 to it, the database implicitly changes the timestamp to a date, adds 1, and then changes. And so this is actually a date here. It's not a timestamp. You can tell that that's a date because if I just do sys timestamp, I have a different timestamp format. So when I added 1 to it, it changed it to a date, and I completely lose all time zone information. So don't do this with timestamps. Truly, you shouldn't even do it with dates, but don't do this with timestamps. With timestamps, you want to use these functions. You've got num to ds interval, and you got num to md interval, which is, I'm sorry, ym interval, which is, this gives you days to seconds. So you can do 10 day, 10 hour, 10 second. So you can add numbers to intervals like this, or you can do ym to do year to month. So this would be, we add 10 months if we do this. That will keep you safe from all these things. Now you don't lose your time zone information. And in fact, if you do this, it actually will get, if we do TZR, TZD, right, we'll actually see the right, oh, that's, no, okay. I would have to change I'd have to do another 2-car on this to see the TZD. But what I'll say is you do get the right, standard time, daylight time when you use this. But if you just add numbers to this, days to this, you lose all that time zone information. So that's my last little trick. So I guess that's a long-winded discussion of time zones. I'm going to give one more little thing. I wrote a big blog post about this for insum.ca last night. And this is do you use WordPress, Rachel?
Yes, I have.
So you would already know this, but I rarely use WordPress. But this is what happened to me. I made a bunch of changes. I did a blog last night, and I saved my changes along the way. I clicked Save Changes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I made some more changes. I spelled your name wrong. I saved my changes. Guess what? That Save Change buttons just changes this. You have to actually save the draft.
Do. Yes, it is very tricky.
Yeah. So that said, I will not get my blog post out as quickly as I had thought I might. Well, I appreciate you being a bit of my foil today, but it was honestly, your message about time zones came right on the heels of me having to relearn all of this for another project. So it was perfect timing.
Oh, nice.
So
I hear that a lot about me. Always perfect timing.
Perfect.
Wrong time zone, perfect timing.
So, well, I appreciate you joining. I know Stephen has a number of other segments that he does. I'm unprepared for all of those, but I do hope that folks will stop using dates. Just stop using them. Start using timestamp with local time zone, and use the interval math. That's my soapbox for today.
All right, we'll quit with the add months unless we need it.
Right. Oh, right. I mean, add months will work for dates, right? Yeah, and I agree with you. If you're using dates, you should use add months and not just +1 or +2. But just get away from altogether. Just use timestamps. Timestamp with local time zone, timestamp with time zone, and then use the num to ds interval or num to ym interval.
We'll see. We're going to have to send out a poll and see how many people we've converted.
Oh, I like that actually. Yeah. So if you've decided to change from dates to timestamps because of this episode, put a comment in. I would love to see people say, "I'm convinced," or tell me why I'm wrong. That would also be interested. If somebody tells me why I'm wrong, I will investigate it and get back to you. But I think I'm right.
Yeah, 90% of the time, it's because it was designed that way, Anton.
All right. Well, hey,
Well,
I don't
this
want
is,
to keep everybody any longer. It's been 26 great minutes. Thanks so much again, Rachel.
thank you. And Michelle, we miss you.
Yeah. Well, have you back on the show sometime. I guess I can't really invite you, can I? That would be Steven's job. So, adding months is not always correct. Select numbed from dual. Interesting. Okay, I suppose I should actually do this to see what the issue is. Okay. So this is a really interesting thing because, and I don't know if I can copy this. Let me see if I can. I don't know how to copy it, but I'll do this. So this is the particular thing that was on here was about a leap year. Or oh no, it's not a leap year. 129, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 129. So 01, 29. Okay. When to add Y to M 13 months. Right. So the question becomes date not valid for So you can't really add 13 months to 129, right? Because it doesn't, it's not meaningful. So the question, the comment here is it doesn't always work, but I would argue that in this case it is working unless you want, like when you do add months to this with a day, I think it takes you to the 28th of February. But it's really, what do you think it should do if you tried to add or even 1 month to this, right? I think would also fail, right? If you're adding 1 month to this, because there is no February 29th. So I suppose you do need to be careful about that kind of thing. But I don't know. I guess I don't know what the answer is. What should it do? If you're adding days, minutes, seconds, you're always going to get the right thing. It'll take care of leap years. It'll do all those kinds of things. But trying to add a month to something like that, can I post? Yeah, I'll definitely post. I'm going to post all of these examples in my blog post, which I will probably get done probably today, I hope. So on insum.ca, it should be out there. So Niels, I disagree. I don't think that that's the correct timestamp. But I mean, that's something. When you add 13 months or 1 month for that matter to January 29th, I just I just think
we
that
have a rule at Insum. If you can convince Anton, you you need a good solid 30 minutes for the conversation.
right. I think I'd be happy to continue that conversation, but yeah, with dates it would do right. So that's what I'm saying. With dates, it will actually take the prior date. But I don't know that that's correct, right? I think in this kind of case, when you're adding a month to January 31st or January 30th, I think it's just not well defined. And honestly, for me, it deserves an error. You can't add a month to it. And I can see where other people would not want that, but I think it's something. I don't think that it's a bug. I think it's just understanding the design. That's my take on it. And I think the same could be true of the date one, right? When you add months to a date, it behaves differently, right? It takes the last day of the month, even though that you're not adding a full month, right? So my feeling is, as long as you understand these things, you have to deal with them. I'm not a big fan of adding months in that way, unless I know that I'm not crossing a boundary like that. If it's the first day of the month, sure, add months. But if it's the 30th, be careful. Okay, I think that is fully half an hour, probably more than anybody ever wanted to spend on dates, time zones. But if you have comments, please put them in the comments of the show, and I'll make sure Stephen gets back to you, or hope that he does. That's it. I guess play the music.